Hey everybody, welcome to Road to Becoming a Programmer, where we take you, the viewer, and make you a full-on programmer. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about forms in HTML. Now, as you can see, that we don't really use any CSS in this video, but use some CSS for margin. But we're just going to be making this very basic form right here. We're going to be using all the most common input types as well as text area, and yeah, we're just going to be making a very basic form. And by the end of this video, you should have a good understanding of how forms work, what the different input types are, how text area works, how select works, and all that, and how to make the reset and submit button in forms. So that's it. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below if you had any trouble or any problems, anything you want to talk about, and yeah, enjoy. Okay, so here we are in Visual Studio Code as always, and I've just created an HTML page and a CSS page linked to our HTML page. So in order to make a form in HTML, we first of all have to use the work form element, and then the form element has access to an attribute called action. Now action basically takes all of the input that we get from the user and it sends it to a server or another HTML page. Now in this case we don't really have a server running, but we could just make up a random server like server.php, which doesn't really exist in this case, but we just have to give some kind of input so that it actually works. Next we have the method attribute, and the method attribute is used for saying how we want to send our information to our server. So we're going to be using the get value in this video, but basically don't focus on this too much for now. Just use get and server.php so that our form functions correctly. Now we use inputs to get inputs from our users, which basically creates a simple text box in our web page. So for example, the input that we're using right now, the input that has the attribute typed text value, basically means that we get a very basic box standard text box. Now we want to put something behind our text box so that the user knows what they're supposed to be typing in the text box. So that's why we use our label elements, and we type a name inside of our label like that, so the user knows that they're supposed to be typing their name inside the text box. And we could put a little star at the end of our name so that the user knows that it's something that's mandatory, that they have to fill in this text box. Now if you notice, the label element has an attribute called for, which we can use to link to another element. For example, we can give our input the ID of say name or username, and then we can put that same value inside of our for attribute, which makes it where our label is linked to our input. So for now, right now, if I click on my name and label, it's gonna activate my text box. And of course, we should also give all of our inputs, not just this one, all of our inputs the attribute name, which is used to give information to our server. So for example, we're gonna give this the value of username, and we're gonna save that, and you can see that it's working just fine. And what we want to do is that we're going to put all this inside a div so that it's all organized. It's all well organized. And that's it for our username. Now we want to go ahead and create another text box for our password this time. And of course, I have a CSS running that's going to put some spacing between some margin between our text boxes, or our divs, I should say. So we just create another div this time for our password, and we're gonna be creating a label first. We're gonna create a label first, and we're gonna give this for the value pass. And then we're gonna type in password, so the user knows that they're supposed to be typing their password, and then put a star at the end so they know that the password is also mandatory. And then we use the input element this time. Instead of using the vanilla text value, we're gonna be using password. Now the difference between the password type and the text type is that the password makes it when the user is typing their password, they can't actually see what they're typing. And this is something that we've seen in a lot of different sites where we're typing our password, we can't really see what we're typing. And then we also give it an ID password so that it's linked to our label, and a name password as well. And now we want to create another div. This time it's going to be for our buttons. So the first button we're going to be creating is going to be submit button, which we still going to using the input element for doing so. And just like that, we get a submit button by putting submit value inside of its type attribute. Now let's type something in here, and we submit it, and you can see that it sends the information to our server, but we don't really have a server, so nothing really happens. Now we use input to create another button. This time it's going to be for reset. So we use the reset button to basically delete all the information that the user has typed in inside of our text boxes. We also want to give both of these names and IDs. And I don't know if you notice or not, but just like I said, if you type in something in our password text box, it shows it as just random, not random, but it doesn't really show you what we're typing in there. And we go ahead and we want to check our buttons. So we're gonna type something and try to reset it, and it just reset it, so it works fine. So we put both of those inside a single div. Now we're gonna be creating another div. This time it's gonna be for our age, or I guess the user's age. So we're gonna go label, and we're gonna put age inside of it. It's for attribute, and our age isn't really necessary, so we didn't really put a star at the end of it, just normal age. And this time we're going to be using the number value for our type. So I'm going to show you how that differs from the previous ones, previous password and text. So first of all, we're going to give it an ID, age, so that it's linked to our label. Name. Next, we're going to give it a name. And so if we go and save it and run our page, we can see that we have our age right here, and it works similar to how we've seen in a lot of different sites. Now we want our buttons to be at the end of our form. So let's just move that entire div to the bottom, and we can see that the reset and submit button are at the end of our form. So now we can also give our type number a min value, so that the user can only start their age from, let's say, 10. Like they can't say they're 9 years old. And we can give it a max value, so that they can't say they're 101 years old, or 102 years old, or 200 years old, or something like that. And we can even give it a step, so that now if you use the up and down arrows, it goes up 10 times, the 10 numbers every time we input that. We can also just manually input something like 72. That works fine. Okay, so now we did talk about how our name and password text boxes are mandatory, but if the user doesn't actually type in anything inside of our text boxes, and we try to submit it, it still works. It still sends our form information to the server. Now, how do we change that? Well, we have to use an attribute called required, and we're gonna have to use this attribute for both our name and our password. So once we do this, if the user tries to, let's say, type in something inside one of the text boxes, like the name, and forgets to type something inside the password text box, if they try to submit, they get this. That tells the user that they're supposed to be typing something in the mandatory text boxes. And of course, if you just forget about age and still submit, it still works and still sends the form information to the server, because age is not mandatory. It doesn't have the required attribute. Now there's another attribute I want to talk about. It's called placeholder. Basically what it does is that it puts a text that we choose inside of our text box, so that for example, we can use this as show the user what an example of what they can write inside of this text box. So in this case, I said username. I gave the placeholder the value of name, so that the user knows that it's supposed to be typing in their name. I could have chosen something else, like say Jack, so as an example of what kind of name that they can type in. And we can do the same thing for our password. Let's say we choose password. So if you go back, we can see that there's it says password in there. Of course, we could have use something else like ABC123, something like that, as an example of what they can type in. We can again do the same thing for age as well. And that's that. Now there's another attribute that we can use instead of placeholder, and that's called value. What value does is that instead of just having a text inside of our text box that doesn't really do anything, value actually types in an input, it types something inside of our text box. So for example, in this case, we have the value of the input, the password input set to password. So basically it just types password inside of the password text box. And we can do the same thing for all of our other inputs as well, but basically we just use this to give a certain default value, give a certain default text, and have that inside of our text boxes that we choose to use value for. But yeah, I personally think placeholder is better, but you can use value as well if you want to. And the user can just delete certain part of it, or keep it like it is. For example, if you just want to keep certain part of it, they can do that. They can edit it. They can edit it and change it the way they want, just like normal text. Well, I'm just gonna use placeholder for now. And yeah, same thing for our password input or password text box. Now we can see this working how we want. So let's move on to the next part. We're gonna be creating another div. This time it's gonna be for date. We can use this for let's say birth date. So for this form, we're gonna give the value birth date. Of course, it doesn't really matter as long as your for value matches the ID of your input. It works fine. But it's better to use something that actually makes sense. So we're gonna be creating an input this time. The input type is gonna be different. It's gonna be the value of date, and we're gonna give it an ID and name as we always do. So what this does is that instead of creating a normal text box that you can type something inside of, it creates a date text box, and I'm going to show you how that looks in a second. But we can also give it a min and max value so that we can choose what period of time they can select their date from. For example, you can say maximum 2020, minimum 2010, so they can only choose a date between 2010 to 2020. And if we say that on our page, we can say that we have our date text box right here, and it even has a calendar section that we can choose from, or we can just type it manually like this. And yeah, it just keeps on going. But yeah, basically that's how the date text box works, or the date input I should say. So that's that. Now let's create another div. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create a checkbox for the user. Now checkboxes are used for whenever we want to present multiple choices to our user, and the user is supposed to choose one or more than one answer. They can choose one of the options, or they can choose multiple options. It's up to them. So we use the checkbox value for our type to create a checkbox, and of course, as always, we give it an ID and a name. So that's how we get a very basic checkbox. But right now there isn't anything next to it, so we want to write a label for it as well, and use the for to link it to its ID. Now we want to create another div and then put this div inside of that. So because we're going to be creating multiple checkboxes, not just this one. And in here we're going to be typing something like choose your favorite food, or fruit, or what is your favorite fruit, that sort of thing. So that the user can choose something, and they don't have to necessarily choose just one of the options presented to them. So now we can see choose your favorite fruits. And what we want to do is we want to create another div, and of course we want to give this the label banana. So this is for the banana fruit, and we want to create another div and just copy and paste it like that, and we want to change it to apple. Now, so what we did is that we created two checkboxes, but here's the problem. If I click on my apple, it still checks and unchecks the banana one. And why is that? But if I click on just the checkboxes, it still works. So let's go back. Let's look at our code. We can see that our label, both of them, are linked to the very first input that has check, right? So the one for the banana input. So let's change that. We want to change for our second one's ID, our second checkbox, to be something like check2. And then the same thing for the label. And I want to change the first one as well to check1. So now if I click on my banana, it works for the banana. If I click on my apple, it works for the apple checkbox. It's all linked to the one they're supposed to be linked to. Now let's create another div for the next one. This time we're going to go back to our inputs, and we're going to be creating a radio button. Now the way the radio button works is that the user can only choose one of the options that's presented to them. So for example, we can ask the user what their gender is, and they can choose between either male or female. Now, as always, we want to give it an ID and a name. But this time the ID isn't gonna be like radio or something like that. It's gonna be mail, because we're gonna have two of these. We're gonna have two radio buttons, and we're gonna give it a label that's linked to our radio button. So it's like this. Notice that the checkboxes look different as well. One of them is squared, and the previous ones, the checkboxes were circle. So now let's create another div and ask the user what their gender is. We just say gender. What we're gonna do is that we want to cut this, put it inside the bigger div, and then just write another div inside of that. This time it's gonna be for the female one. So all we have to do is just change the male to the female, change the male text to the female. But yeah, so pretty easy, kind of similar to checkboxes, except the main difference is that this one's used for whenever we want the user to just pick one of the options that's presented to them. Whereas in the previous one, the user can choose between any of the fruits that's presented to them. They can choose both of them. They can choose to like banana and apple. Whereas in here, they can choose to be male or female. Now let's create another div. This time it's gonna be for the select element. Now select works kind of similar to the previous two, except it's a little bit different, and I'm gonna show you what I mean by that. So first of all, we create this select element. We're gonna give it a name and ID, but once we've done that, we want to put options inside of our select. Now options, they're pretty much what they sound like. They're the options that the user can choose from. So for example, we want to create let's say a select for superheroes, so the user can choose what their favorite superhero is. And something that's interesting about select is that you can have it where the user can choose between one of the options presented to them, just one, or they can choose multiple options, right? On default, it's set to where the user can only choose one of the options that presented them. So in this case, the user can only choose one of the superhero names. But if we type in the attribute I'm not gonna talk about that. I'm just gonna wait for now until we get there. Something you might have noticed that instead of just typing inside of our option tag, I can just use the label attribute for option. So this way, if I go, you can see that the Batman text is written inside of our option. But if I just do it like this, that still works technically. Spider-Man is still there, but I recommend that you use the label attribute for this instead of just typing inside of the option. But again, that works fine. And of course, use the values to say what our options are. We can go on now. We should have a spawn running as well. But yeah, let's create a label for our select. We want to link it to the actual select ID, which is soups. And then we want to say who's your favorite superhero, something like that. So now we've done that, let's add a BR so that it moves to the next line. So that looks much better. Now let's, so this is what I was talking about earlier. If you add the multiple attribute to our select, we can actually choose multiple options and not just one. So now I can choose all of them. I can choose two of them. I can choose however I like. So now let's create another div. This time it's gonna be for the user's email, I believe. Okay, so we're gonna be taking the user's email. So here's the thing: the email text box works similar to the default text box, except that if you try to type something that doesn't really exist as not an actual email, the browser will notice and the user will get a prompt saying that hey, you're not entering an actual email in this email text box. And we're going to be using the required attribute for email, so this way that the user knows that it's mandatory to input their email. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and move on to the next text box, which is going to be for phone numbers, taking the user's phone number. So we're going to create a div, label, and input as always, and then input is going to have the usual name and ID, and the label is going to have 4. But this time the value that we're going to be giving the type is tel. Now tel, what makes tel different from the basic text, the basic text box is that if you try to type in with tel using your phone, what's gonna happen is that the user is gonna get have access to their certain not keyboard, but a certain almost the keyboard that they can that's made just for typing their phone numbers, like kind of how like when you're trying to call someone, you get something like that. Of course, it doesn't really make it that much of a difference if you're using a laptop like I am right now, or any PC. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're gonna be using another way to take input from our user without using the input element. This time we're gonna be using the text area. So let's see how that works. First of all, we create another div for it. Then we use the actual text area element. So this is basically what it sounds like. It just creates an area of text that the user can write their information in. For example, let's say we ask the user if they like to give us any other information, give us something that we forgot to mention in the form, or tell us more about themselves. That's what this is for. So we can also use the calls and rows attributes to see how many calls and how many rows it's gonna take, or text area is gonna take. And we give it an ID of text so that we can use the for attribute in our label to link to it. So yeah, it's like this. And again, we can change the rows and columns as well. I'm going to put a BR at the end so that it moves to the next line, so it looks much better. So I want to change this, maybe change this to 50 columns, so it's taking up more space. But yeah. Anyways, let's create another div. This time it's gonna be for another input. We're going back to inputs. It's gonna be normal text. Again, going back to the original text. It's gonna be a value of text, and this one is gonna be for browsers. We wanna give the user an option to pick between different browsers, and see which one they prefer, what's their favorite. So what we've done is that we create a list. The ID is normal. That doesn't matter. We've done that all the previous ones. But the difference here is that we create a list. Now the way this works is that once we give it a list, let's say list with the value browsers, and then we create a data list, right? And the data list has the ID of browsers. Now our input is linked to our data list, right? So get this. Once we've done that, we create our data list. We want to give it options, kind of like I did with the select element. We give it options again. And we want to give our options values. And let's say we give the first one Chrome, and this is where we can ask the user what's their favorite browser, or what browser do you prefer. And we can just copy this and just paste it like this. Of course, that's not how the option tag works. I made a mistake here. I forgot to close the option tag. Like that. And again, we can just put it inside the tag, but we didn't. We just use the value this time, because it's better to just use value instead. And Brave, Opera, and Firefox. I guess this is. So these are the the browsers, and we're asking the user which one they prefer, and they can choose from them like this. And yeah, so let's put a BR then there again so that it moves to the next line. We save that. Now that we've done all of this, we want to take our buttons that we created right here and want to put them at the very bottom of the form, just like all the other forms you've seen online. So now we have our submit and reset button at the end, and we have all this other the actual form informations and things that the user is supposed to fill out. And if we try to submit without filling the email, it gives us a prompt. But if we try to do an entire email that doesn't really exist, we get this. Read this text, it says it must include an @. So we do that, then we go like something like gmail.com. Now if we try to do it, it works. So let's just take all of this. Let's just take all this form that we've made so far and put it inside something called a field set. Now the way that a field set works is that basically what it does is that it puts a little border around our form like this. You can see it right here. And you might say, well, why don't I just use border for our form? Wouldn't that be better? Well, you could do that, but here's the thing. A field set has access to another element called legend. And here's what that does. We can add a heading or something like that to our form. So for example, we can say personal info, and then we get this right here. Okay, so thank you for watching so far, and thank you for making it to the end of the video. Now what we want to do for the next video is that we're going to be going back to this site right here, Geeks for Geeks, to this page, and I'm going to be leaving the link for this in the description as well. But we want to create this a web page including form, and we're going to be creating this one. And we're going to be trying to make a web page just like this, a proper looking clean form. And so you can see that this uses a placeholder. This has the normal age, and then enter your email. And if you try to do it without entering something, we get this prompt. And if we do forget to enter email, we get this prompt. So yeah, we're just gonna be making something like this in our next video, so make sure to stick around. I'm gonna be using everything that we've learned in my previous videos. So if you haven't watched those, make sure to go ahead and watch those, so you're ready for my next video.